for today's topic is supply chain through demand transparency. Mm-hmm. And simply put, demand chain transparency requires companies to know what is happening downstream in the supply chain and then communicate this knowledge internally and externally. So Lynn, I know you have been leading an initiative to increase demand transparency for more sustainable global supply chain ecosystem. Could you tell us more about why you are passionate about this topic and what are you trying to achieve? And maybe also give us some examples.
Yes, and I am passionate about this topic. I feel like as a supply chain professional, navigating the challenges of the past 2 years and seeing the significant impact it's having on the world, different industries, people's income, the potential risk involved that we see going forward. I feel like we have an obligation to look for ways to improve the entire agility and resiliency of the global supply chains. And I mentioned about, earlier about companies forecasting for the same demand or the same potential growth. What we've never been able to solve for is how can you rationalize that demand. And again, every company, they have their order book, they have their forecast, they have their sales and marketing plans. They want to grow their business. So when we say artificial demand, I'm not saying anybody's a bad actor in this or trying necessarily to inflate it, but growing their business and being very optimistic about their growth opportunities. But in an entirely or a very complex global supply chain, if you think sometimes you have the brand owners who partner with a company like Flex to do their production. We work with distribution and we work with the suppliers directly. Many of our, especially on the semiconductor side, you have suppliers who are fabless, who work with other external partners for the silicon and then outsource back-end test and assembly and packaging. So it's a really complex supply chain. So when we start at the very beginning, where you see some demand being duplicated because companies are going after the same opportunity, it just gets exasperated throughout the system. And it becomes very difficult to plan for the future and to work through some potential noise in the system. So I'm advocating, and I've brought together some industry professionals to work together collaboratively to say, okay, these are the challenges we're currently facing and for many of us have faced a few times in our career. What are some initiatives we could work on to try and ease some of the challenges, alleviate some of the constraints that are currently faced and work towards a better future, utilizing the data we have in a different way? Because there is a lot of data. We have a very sophisticated supply chain, but it becomes, as I mentioned, with that proliferation of semiconductor content, that the customer base has gotten so much broader. And for every company in the channel or in the ecosystem, you're always trying to maximize capacity. So the idea is, can we get together? Can we share information in a different way, still very protected, very secure, but just to enable better planning across the ecosystem.
Do you think Flex is positioned to lead an initiative like this?
No, I think, it was an idea that came from Flex that we had, but we are looking at putting together an appropriate organization to lead this, because it should be more independent, in my opinion. But the nice thing I have is there's a lot of people that I've spoken to who are interested in looking at different ways in which we can partner together and drive a better supply chain for the world.
Yeah, I can totally see a strong reason to support an initiative like this, because resources are very limited, right? The reason that we have shortage is because it's not enough, whether it's triggered by the demand or whether it's triggered by supply. But the bottom line here is we don't have enough resources, and we wanted to manage the resources in a way the most optimal way and the benefits, right? The greater society. So there's definitely a good reason, strong reason to support that. My question will be, since we are all in value supply chain, I mean, we somewhat familiar with the system, and in your perspective, what are some of the players should participate and join in this kind of initiative, and further kind of collaborating in a way that will yield out some good outcome? Is that more like you think the upstream of the supply chain or the downstream of the supply chain, or?
It's everybody. It's really everybody across the ecosystem to understand. One of the areas we talk to a lot is the challenges of our suppliers' and getting visibility into that. And that's, been talked about for my entire career, and it's hard and it's expensive and it's challenging. And, but having that knowledge of a potential impact to your supplier is very important. And that became, really came to light through COVID and through the multitude of supply chain challenges that we've been facing over the past 2 years. So it is a requirement to get deeper into the supply chain and to understand where those critical inflection points can occur that would cause problems.
If we talk about a forecast, is really your customer, right? Like the customer's visibility, customer understanding of the market. So I think Flex is very much in the important part of the chain that you actually have a lot of visibility to both upstream as well as the downstream. And then you are very, very close to your customer, to the end user, right? So arguably speaking, that more towards the downstream supply chain has more visibility in terms of the forecast. What are your thoughts about that?
Yeah, it is. We obviously, work really closely with our customers who, like you said, have visibility into the end markets. But it's, it's where Flex sits. We're building for our customers. We're their partners. So although we have a lot of information, it's confidential. So nothing can be worked out differently than it's done today until we address those issues of security and confidentiality. Mm-hmm. But I do think, to your point, Flex has a great visibility of our supply base. When 16,000 suppliers is daunting when you mention that number that we work with for our direct procurement. But when you break that down into the preferred suppliers, the growth suppliers, and really understanding and partnering with the ones that are really important to the future, it's manageable. And that's where we need to make sure we're looking at all aspects of the complex supply chain and how we can, improve that demand forecasting, which helps with capacity planning, which would hopefully in the future, because it's not a short-term solution. It's a futuristic vision to help prevent some of the challenges we're facing today from facing in the future. Although that being said, some of these could have been predicted, others absolutely could not, right? Mm-hmm. So there's certain aspects, of the challenges we faced this past year that you can't mitigate completely against them. The COVID impact that you're having, or when you have lockdowns in cities, you might have been able to, once the pandemic started, maybe had predicted, yep, we're going to see some challenges there. But already then you're in a supply constraint environment. So you need to do a combination of look at ways in which you can prevent future supply chain impacts, but probably at the same time, and more importantly, how do you react quickly to mitigate a supply chain impact? Because not everything is preventable.
Mm-hmm. So I'm curious, I have a few follow-up questions. One is because Flex has customer base across all different industries, right? Let's say, automobile industry, the cloud-based consumer electronics. So do you see actually, medical is another important one, right? So do you actually see there's certain industry actually doing a better job in terms of providing transparency on demand forecasting, or do you actually thinking this is a universal challenge across all the industry?
It's another question or another answer where it's a little bit of both. Some of the larger high-tech companies who have, been in this for, a long time and have worked with the advanced technology suppliers, probably have a bit more visibility and transparency of their demand because they need to partner with the suppliers because their demand is so large. So they're planning, for future requirements. Now that isn't perfect, but there is more visibility there versus some of the smaller and mid-tier customers who don't have that level of visibility and transparency. So it's a combination.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay. So let's see. I would like to reveal the result of our poll question here. The question is supply chain designed to be transparent? And it's a single choice. So yes, no, or don't know, right? 3 possible answers. We have 71% voted no, and then 18% voted yes, and 12% mentioning don't know. So it's very interesting. I feel like most people, probably more than 70%, thinking the supply chain system is not designed to be transparent. Lynn, what do you think?
There is a level of transparency because typically when, you're working in an industry like mine, information is tied to the brand owner or the end customer that we're working towards. So that information flows through, through the systems because it's needed by multiple players for different reasons, whether it be planning for the future, bonus payments for employees. There's reasons why that flows through. Where we don't see the transparency is the cross-industry requirements. That's where it gets more unclear when multiple players are forecasting for the same demand. And it's always a challenge too, right? Because anybody who predicts the future, you're only right after you revise those predictions and they've come true. But there are tools and process and data sets that are available to us that could help guide that forecasting of demand that's taken place by multiple constituents.
So that's very interesting perspective, Lynn. Is supply chain designed to be transparent? Why and why not, right? And I think in thinking of a few reasons, why, I think by nature it could be transparent. Mm-hmm. Maybe let me just name a few. One is supply chain is all connected, right? So it's sort of from upstream and downstream, you can see a flow. So clearly, right, there's information, there's forecasting, there's data flows through the chain. Mm-hmm. So from technical standpoint, logically speaking, right, it should be able to provide that system design by itself. It should be able to provide transparency. Secondly, maybe, because common resources are shared. I mean, even these days, electrification, you could imagine, right? Semiconductor, as another example, is widely used across industry. So the same capacity, the same resources, same technology, same supply, could be shared among all these different companies, industries, and so on and so forth. So then you're able to, right, kind of track down what are those commonality among them and, to find that transparency. And also, I think, some industry, maybe the forecast is more known and stable. Use defense as an example is, when you get a contract, right? So that industry forecast is very stable versus maybe some industry is not. So there's clearly, if you really brainstorming about why the system can be transparent, I can think of a few. Do you have, other things to add?
No, I think you accurately captured them. There is tremendous data that flows through the system that does make it transparent. At the same time, protecting the bills of materials of our customers and their core technologies. But the data, there is the data that flows through it, and it enables a level of visibility, but not enough today to really be able to identify the true demand that we're looking at, and that's the challenge. So it is designed to be transparent with the data flow, but it's not able to correct or predict where we're seeing the demand coming through as being, higher or lower than what the growth should be for that particular industry.
Yeah, so that's perfect because it leads to us to thinking about why not, right? Why not? The system is not transparent. We have a great comments from the audience. Let me just read it. Poking a hole in the concept, private entities view supply chain as a competitive advantages now. So there is no interest in being transparent. Well, maybe novel. And then organization are trying to survive and driven by human behavior. It's not viewed as a global pandemic or environment cost effective millions cross countries. So, you get the idea of the sentiment that there's a strong argument about the system is not meant to be transparent because of competitive advantage. I thought that was interesting. If we further expand, from a company, from an industry perspective, absolutely, but also from country standpoint, right? So, I also think at a country level, these days that the supply chain strength become a country's competitiveness as well. So how do we thinking about that, and how do we overcome some of the challenges coming from that perspective?
Well, I think there were some really critical points that were mentioned. There is a need for secure data, and we do need to protect the customer's interests and their core competencies that come with that. And there is also the idea that, hey, this is not a problem for today, it's a problem for tomorrow or someone else's problem. I'll go back to, there's an opportunity that to use the data we have in a different way, still having that same security, because you can't forego the security. That's the critical part. Everybody's data needs to be secure, but can we look at utilizing, an independent third party to utilize artificial intelligence with the data that is presented to it to provide output to companies that help them better plan their manufacturing. That's the core concept. We have to keep that data secure. There's other arguments. One could say, like at Flex, we have global scale and scope. We have an amazing tools and systems and processes. Helen, you've seen some of the capabilities we have. Our digitalization strategy is outstanding. So I could easily argue that Flex is in a strong position to manage through these supply chains better than our competition, right? That's looking at it one way from the business setting. From a personal setting, and I'll say it again, I just think as supply chain professionals living through what we're dealing with today, we have an obligation to look at ways to improve forecasting and managing supply to prevent or mitigate some of the challenges that we've been facing over the past 2 years. So there's the business case for it, but there's the humanitarian case for it as well.